Welcome back to the show. I'm Chad, and today we have a returning guest who I chatted with back in February of 2024 when he was kickstarting his Dead Air book on Kickstarter, and he's back with a new book, and so he's here to chat with us, and so we can see what he's been up to and go from there. Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you? It's good to be back.
Yeah, well, good to have you back, and sorry it was so long.
So yeah, like you said, last time we talked was about 18 months ago, and this new book actually came out of the old book being on hiatus due to some health issues with my co-creators on Dead Air. I ended up having a decent amount of free time that was unrelated to. I didn't have any comics projects on the go, so I started thinking about things I don't normally think about and getting out of my comfort zone with comics. And the end result was this new book.
So before we jump into that, since it's been so long, why don't you tell us again your history, both as a comic book reader and as a creator?
Sure. So I'm a full-time writer, and I've been doing that for about 17 years, mostly in automotive and technology, culture, that kind of stuff. But I really started as a comics creator in 2019, 2020, when I had this idea for a book that I thought really needed a visual element. I thought that would really just dramatically improve the story that I wanted to tell. And I reached out to a couple of friends who I knew were in the comic business. A friend of mine who I've known my entire life, who's a designer, Angela Hodge, and her partner, Joe Ing, who's a comic book artist who'd worked on Street Fighter, G.I. Joe, and Transformers. And I told them about this idea that I had sketched out and asked them, hey, do you know anybody who would be interested in working on this book with me? And it turns out that both of them were the people who wanted to do that. And so I spent the next year and a half, 2 years, basically at full-time comics college, where Joe was my professor, and I learned a whole bunch of stuff about visual storytelling and things that I had never really previously considered. I came to comics really late in life. I got involved in my early 30s, and because there was a independent comic shop that opened up a couple blocks from a place I just moved into in Montreal, a place called Crossover Comics, and they introduced me to the independent comic scene, which I didn't know existed. I had read, Sunday morning cartoons when I was not cartoons, but comic strips when I was a kid, and I loved them. Charles Schultz and GB Trudeau and Berkeley Breathed and whatnot. But when I moved into my teens, I didn't really transfer that to comic books. I wasn't really a big superhero guy. So being informed about this world outside of that kind of comic book was incredible. And after 8 or 9 years of absorbing that through every pore and eyeball and ear hole that I had, I wanted to get involved myself, and that's how I got into making my own comics.
So do you remember the indie comic that you discovered and kind of hooked you?
Yeah, definitely. It would be Fun Home by Alison Bechtel.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
really grabbed me. I didn't know that kind of storytelling was out there, which it feels like crazy to say now. Like I feel ignorant to say something like that, but I guess I was at the time. Like I just hadn't been exposed to it. I think part of it too is where I grew up in Quebec, where pretty much everyone speaks French, and there's a heavy BD culture, like bande dessinée, which is the French type of comic books, like Lucky Luke and Asterix and Obelix, which I read when I was a kid as well, translated versions and the French versions, but I never made the connection that there was something more than that, and to discover that there was an independent comics world that functioned outside of the French system and that functioned outside of things like Superman and Batman, which I was tangentially interested in, but didn't really pull me in that hard. That was incredible. It's like opening, like having one eye open your whole life, and then you open the other eye. It was that much of a change.
So let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit about, give us the elevator pitch and the larger story of Model UN.
So the elevator pitch is: what if you were in a Model UN club in high school in the 90s and some aliens showed up and decided that you were actually the real United Nations and that they were going to negotiate with you about the fate of your planet? And uh, for me, the bigger story for Model UN was there were two things that I really wanted to do. I wanted to kind of create a freaks and geeks kind of situation where I had a bunch of misfits who get together and do their Model UN club, and some of them want to be there and they're real keeners and they're very interested, and some people are just going with the flow, and some people are just there for extra credit. And I always like when you can take disparate personalities and kind of put them in a box and then shake that box up. And I decided to shake the box up with aliens. um, and by doing so, I was able to, at least for me, explore a couple things that tied into my own high school experience, which was like uniformly negative. And I wanted to pull some positive stuff out of that. I ended up at I got expelled from, oh, looks like you disappeared.
Oh no, my camera froze for some reason.
Ah,
So
all right. I'm comfortable moving on in the darkness. It's all good. As I was saying, I want to take some positive stuff out of the negative high school experience I had, where I was expelled from public school and ended up a scholarship student at the only other English language school in my area, which was a really tiny private school. And in Model UN, I get to take these two hierarchies, one of them being, the rigid private school background that these kids are in, and then these aliens who show up where the leader of the aliens is incredibly stubborn and doesn't want to admit the fact that maybe they're wrong and that maybe this isn't the actual United Nations, despite the crew providing them with all this evidence and despite the kids themselves saying like, hey, you really shouldn't be talking to us. You should be talking to these other people. And I feel like when you put like two rigid hierarchies up against each other and you create that friction, you can get a lot of comedy out of it.
mhm. So is it a comedy? Is it a sci-fi? Is it a little bit of this, a little bit of that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'd say it's primarily a comedy with the sci-fi elements giving it a bit of structure. Um, I had originally thought about doing it as like a slice of life comic about these kids who are just in Model UN and what their days are like. And then I realized that I'm not a huge manga fan. Like I don't know a ton about it. I've read a decent amount over the years that I've liked, but what I liked about manga was the narrative structure that it provided for this kind of story. And so when I was thinking about doing it as a slice of life, I came to the pretty quickly to the realization that Japanese manga masters have already wrung every possible high school idea in existence, like completely dry. And there would be no point in like trying to retell that in the format. So I wanted to add the sci-fi spice to make it different and to give a different kind of hook to get readers interested.
So who are the main characters that we meet in the book?
Well, the main character of the story is a woman named, or a girl named Velma, who's graduating, and she's moderately interested in Model UN. She's there with a friend of hers, Ming Tai, who really enjoys it, and they have a good time being there together. There's the leader of the group, or the leader of the Model United Nations, not necessarily the group outside of that context, is a kid named Khalid, who's a real stickler for rules and regulations, and he knows Robert's Rules of Order back to front. I always like putting characters like that in there because they can always be fun and funny without knowing they're funny, and that's a great type of humor I find. There's a bully kind of character named Nina Vaughn, who is basically thinks she's better than everyone else and is only there because she broke her arm and can't be in soccer for that semester, so she needs the credits and she's toughing it out. And then I have a couple of characters who are maybe they're foils for the main characters. Is a character named Mauricio, who's Velma's crush, and he's a stand-up guy and just a general nice guy who's interested in Model UN, but he's not a huge keener. And then there is a kind of a nerdy dude who has a big crush on Velma, creating kind of a little triangle. But he's hopeless. Like he's just barely making it through high school, and he reminds me a lot of myself. So he's my write-in who's in there, my stand-in, I guess.
So, well, when I think of Model UN, I automatically flash to the Community episode. I don't know if you're familiar.
I'm familiar with Community. I don't remember that episode specifically, but I can imagine what it would have been like.
So, who are you working with on the on the book?
So my co-creator on this book is an artist named Ai Santillana Hernandez. He lives in Argentina, and I met him through a Facebook group that connects artists with writers. Joe, as I mentioned, my usual collaborator, he's not really working right now because he's still recovering from an illness. And he also, I didn't really know anyone who drew manga, neither did Joe. It's a pretty different skill set. And when I started looking through different portfolios to kind of figure out who might be a good match, what really stood out for Santillana Hernandez was his ability to draw really great sci-fi stuff like spaceships and interiors and technology, but also his characters were very human and the facial expressions were detailed and expressive to the point where I could tell what they were thinking and what they were feeling. And I quickly realized that that combination of skill sets is not common among manga artists, at least not the manga artists I was running across. So it's been a really great and fruitful collaboration. One of the things I really appreciate about working with him is his ability to inject energy onto the page. He's taken some page ideas and some panel ideas that I've had that were mostly static, and he would come up with alternate versions that he would show me and be like, hey, what if we have this movement here, or what if the person's looking from this side to that side, or what if I put this detail in the background that kind of fleshes out the dynamics of the page. And it's been a real pleasure to work with him because of that.
So how, if in any way, is this different from Dead Air, which is the other book that we chatted about last year, which is more of a, if I remember correctly, it's, I don't know, are they the same type of books? Are they different? Is it they use a different type of
they're really different, and that's been kind of daunting for me. Like Dead Air and Code 45, my previous books were very Western style, full color, full size graphic novel books. Like manga, black and white manga is a huge departure from that, and I'm super nervous as to how many people that I'm lucky enough to count as my audience are going to be willing to take a chance on something that's that different. I think that the energy I bring to the book is similar, and it's also a much more lighthearted book. The Dead Air and Code 45 were both fairly heavy in terms of subject matter. This time I'm just trying to tell an entertaining story and create characters that I think people will want to spend some time with. And it's been really enjoyable to do that. It's a nice break from writing sadder things, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have a newsletter that goes out to the people who've been generous enough to support my work in the past, and I've been showing them the development process of the book so far, and they haven't all unsubscribed. So like that's somewhat of a positive thing, I think. But the Kickstarter goes live on October 7th, so I've still got like a week or so as of this recording to worry about whether people are going to show up or not.
and then the cycle of, or the roller coaster ride of the Kickstarter kicks in.
Yeah, but the Kickstarter itself is going to be different this time because I'm doing an entirely digital campaign. Because of the border tariffs between the US and Canada right now, it's just not possible to predict what the cost of sending a book to the United States would be. And the situation is just so fluid and changing on an almost weekly basis. So I didn't want, most of my audience is in the United States, and I wasn't about to saddle them with crazy customs fees that would have been completely out of everyone's control. So I decided that for this book, I'm doing a digital version only, and that really changed things in terms of how the Kickstarter is managed. I can't provide rewards in the past like I have using things like prints or original art or pins or bookmarks, so that kind of stuff, that kind of ephemera that helps with world building. So it's really going to be based around the book itself. I'm doing a deep dive into how the book was created. So I'm providing the script as well as all the layout pages and a bunch of alternative layouts, because Santillana Hernandez was really great about offering 2 or 3 ideas on certain pages, because he had ways that he wanted to explore in terms of producing this page or that page. And I think it would be interesting for some people to read what the decision making process was. Like sometimes you have a good page and another good page, and you can't put both of those pages in the book, so you have to choose between them. And I'm going to be talking about in that particular rewards tier, I'll be providing those alternate pages and explaining why they didn't make it into the finished project. So that's kind of been my focus for this book as well. And previous books that I've written will also be available in digital format through the campaign.
Yeah, it's hard to tell with, you know, the person who's running things can't make up his own mind or decide what he wants to do. Or
it's very much up in the air.
So, did you say you said that this book is manga influenced? Did you immerse yourself in manga as you were preparing to do this, or?
No, I thought about it. Instead, what I did was I returned to a couple of books that I really liked in that style. Specifically, there's a book called Skullface Bookseller Honda-san. That is it's a book that's about a woman who's selling comics in Tokyo or in Japan. I believe it's Tokyo. And it is a slice of life book in the sense that it's what her life is like in terms of her coworkers and the people who come into her shop. She doesn't own the shop, she just works there. But the hook of the story is she has a skull face, and every character who speaks in the story who isn't a customer has some type of weird face, like a welder's mask, a hockey mask, like a knight's armor kind of thing. And it's a real choice to make when you're putting a book together. But it worked in the sense that it pulled me in, and it made me want to find out more about something that maybe I never would have heard about if it had been released as a normal slice of life kind of thing. So I don't know if that got my mind thinking about like weird ways to spin a story, but it was definitely an inspiration on the manga side for me. I also liked Scott Pilgrim when that came out. I don't know the politics of whether I can call that manga or not, but there are some elements of that type of storytelling that I used or that are inspired by that I used in Model UN, specifically because I'm kind of limiting myself to a page count. I wanted to try to get the story done between 100 and 120 pages. That doesn't leave a ton of room for character development. So all the character development typically has to be done within the story through the narrative. But I also added these kind of stats panel pages. So when a character first appears, there's a little stats panel that goes with them. And it's a combination of like what you'd see on a video game screen when you're choosing your fighter for like Virtua Fighter or Tekken or something, plus what their yearbook would be like. So it would have the things that they like, the things they don't like a quote from them, what they're voted most likely to be by their classmates. And then IE drew there's like a series of accessories that these people have, or items of clothing that they're always wearing. And that's in a little grid at the bottom, kind of like highlighting who their characters are. So that was kind of a fun thing to do. And I think that like in manga, you have that freedom to do that kind of stuff, and you can interrupt the narrative that way. You can interrupt the flow of panels that way without interrupting how the story is being told.
Now, having just heard that, is there a particular character that you became attached to, or would like to, explore more in a more fleshed out way?
That's a really good question. In terms of exploring more in a fleshed out way, when I conceived the characters, I knew what kind of story they were going to be in. So a couple of them have a larger backstory that does get serviced outside of the main narrative, because it ties into how the narrative wraps up towards the end. So those characters I think are being done well. But the bully, Nina Vaughn, they're fun to write for because they're mean, but ultimately, like, I didn't want to make a bully who was evil. I just wanted to make the kind of bully that you run into, whether they just have a superiority complex, and they can be fun to write for because they're allowed to say things that other people aren't allowed to say, and that can be fun in a story, because when people say those kinds of things, you can have the characters react in all sorts of ways that can lead to humor. And that's enjoyable. And they can also be more ridiculous, because a great way to deal with bullying is to point out the ridiculousness of the situation And when you're in an alien invasion and you still feel like you need to somehow be the center of attention, it is absurd, and people are going to call you on it. The Earth is a little bit more important than your feelings or your need to be paid attention to at all times.
So, how do you feel that you've grown as a writer from your first couple works in comics? And part two of that question would be, um, have you taken anything from your other writing that you did, have mentioned that you did, and applied it to or found it useful when doing your comic stuff?
I think as a comics writer, the best lessons I've taken from past work is trusting artists on visual elements and reducing the amount of time I spend visually designing certain pages. Although it was interesting on this project because Santiago Hernandez and I, we weren't friends until we started working on this, as opposed to previous projects where my collaborators were people I'd known a very long time, and we had a shared frame of reference. So in some ways on this project, I had to be more descriptive about the time period, what people's hair looked like, for example, or what kind of decorations you would see in a dorm room, because IE is younger than I am and didn't grow up in the 90s the same way that I did. But by the same token, once I was able to conceptually present to him how I wanted pages to look, he was able to take that ball and run with it. And there's a lot of things in this book that started off one way in my head, went on the script a second way, and then Santiago Hernandez created them a third way. And the collaborative aspect of comic books is something I love. I really, really love it, because you get to take two people's brains and mush them together, and you get hopefully the best parts of those brains on the page. And learning to trust that and to like understand my strengths are as a writer and his strengths are creating visuals, that really, really helps. In terms of the other writing that I do, I mean, as a journalist, I'm researching all the time. So anything I need to research for a comic book, I can tap into that skill set and pull from that. So that's pretty helpful.
So going back to Dead Air, how did that? I know you said the project was on hiatus because of your partner's health issues, but how did that campaign turn out? And did you obviously, like you said, this is a very different campaign.
Yeah.
But did you learn any tips that you hope to use in the future? Or
I mean, the campaign went well. We fulfilled it. Everyone seemed very happy with the book. We started on issue 3 before Joe had to withdraw from the project. There's not really a lot I can carry over because of the digital nature of the book. It's been a bit of a sticking point. One thing though that I've changed quite a bit is how I approach getting the word out about the book. I'm doing more podcast appearances this time around, and essentially staying almost completely off of social media, because I really don't think that's a great way to let people know you're working on a book anymore. It just doesn't seem like it's possible to cut through the noise. And also, so many social media sites have become just a negative place to spend time. And I don't have a Twitter account anymore. I spend very little time on Facebook, whereas when we first launched Code 45, we had a 5,000 person Facebook group for it that we had built over time. And we still have that group, but Facebook makes it so difficult to actually reach the people who are interested in your work. You have to pay more and more and more to tap into your audience. It's really crazy. So with this campaign, I'm trying something different. I'm trying actually, speaking to people like you who care about and love comics, and the people who watch and listen to your show. And that, I think, is a more direct and more rewarding way to work on getting the word out about a Kickstarter and talking to people about a new book that I'm on. So I'm going to see what happens. I mean, I don't know. It's uncharted territory, and it kind of, it's scary in one way because it brings me back to like, oh man, it's just like when you had your first book and your first issue and no one knew anything about anything you'd ever done, and you're starting from scratch, from ground zero. It feels like that sometimes, but it's not. It's just a different way of doing things, you know. So I try not to psych myself out about it.
So is there anything that maybe we haven't covered that you would want to make sure that people know about the project, about you, about
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, the easiest way to find out stuff about the book and to get to the Kickstarter, I should mention, is it's at modeluncomic.com. So that takes you to the Kickstarter. If you want to find out about me, I write about comics and my feelings about comics and the background and inspirations for the stuff that I do on my own website, benjaminhunting.com. Everything I do is on there as well. Previous books are available there. And if you want to find me on social media, the one place I do spend some time is Instagram because no one's mean to me there. You can find me. Yeah, it's just pictures, random stuff, weird videos, and I can get with that. So I'm at Hunting Benjamin, but other social media is just like not really these days, you know. But yeah, modeluncomic.com. October 7th is the launch. Not sure when this is going live, but if you're listening to this after October 7th, you can check it out there.
Growing up, were you ever involved in a Model UN?
I wish. I was so jealous. Like, it seemed like the coolest thing whenever I would see it on a TV show or a movie or something. And I always remember like every media depiction of Model UNs ended with them visiting New York City. Like it was the rule. They had to go to New York and they would go to the UN and see it. It was always like grand and spectacular. But for some reason, I don't even know anyone who's been involved in that. I talked to someone who had done something vaguely similar. Their class had run a mock presidential election in the 90s where they had to go through the entire campaign process. And that was as close as they got. But no, it's my white whale, I guess, is being involved in a Model UN.
If you had been, what country would you want to represent?
I would want to represent like a minor country, like not a major player, so that I could be more of an observer. Like maybe like in Model UN, the main character represents Iceland, which I think is like the perfect mix of neutrality and yet global significance because of its geographic location. So I would go for something like Iceland or maybe like a Pacific island, something like that. I think that would be fun.
Okay, fair enough. I hope to get to Iceland one day. So, yeah. Well, if you want to kind of give a final pitch for the book or for the campaign, then we can wrap things up that way.
Sure. Model UN, what happens when a bunch of 90s kids at their Model UN in high school meet a group of aliens who think they're the real United Nations, and they're forced to negotiate with the fate of the Earth hanging in the balance over the course of one crazy weekend when all they want to do is graduate and go home for the summer. So you can find it at modeluncomic.com. It's on Kickstarter starting October 7th, and it is a 54-page first half of the book, black and white manga. And I think you'll have a lot of fun. It's sci-fi meets comedy meets 90s.
All right. Well, when it launches in a few weeks, then we'll be sure to cover it over on the Comic Watch's Crowdfunder corner, and that way we can hopefully get the word out to more people.
Thank you so much, Chad. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this tonight.
I want to thank you for taking the time to work around my crazy schedule.
Of course.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch.
All right. Have a great night.